Chapter 1. 10 Men. Number 1. Karl-Heinz Schwenke, Sturmführer and janitor, formerly tailor, age 54. It was almost midnight of November 9th, 1938, when Standartenführer Curling of the SA Kronenberg entered the Huntsman's Rest at the corner of Frankfurter Platz and the Mauerweg and said, "The synagogue will be burned tonight." As the scene was reconstructed by principals and witnesses 15 years afterwards, there were present in the public room of the inn 20 or 25 uniformed members of the SA Reserve Troop, composed of men over 50, and 5 or 10 members of other SA troops who had dropped in. There were no other customers, and the innkeeper testified in 1948 that he was in and out of the public room that evening and did not hear any of the conversation or remember who was present. After Culling spoke, Sturmführer Schwenke turned to the men in the public room and said, "You heard what the Standartenführer said. Those who want to help, come into the private room with me." The Standartenführer said, "I'll be back," and left the inn. About half the men present, according to the testimony, followed Schwenke into the private room and closed the door. Schwenke reopened the door from within, said, "No more drinking," and closed it again. Those who were left in the public room sat saying nothing for a few moments, and then began talking in low tones. They testified afterward that they could hear the talk but not the words from the other room. 20 minutes later, the Standartenführer re-entered the Huntsman's Rest. The dozen or so men left in the public room were eating buttered bread and drinking coffee, playing skat, reading the paper, or just sitting there. They got to their feet and said, "Hail Hit! They still in there?" said the Standartenführer. "Yes, Herr Standartenführer." The Standartenführer opened the door to the private room, and the talk inside stopped. The dozen or so men got to their feet and said, "Hail Hit! Let's get going," said the Standartenführer, standing in the doorway. "You, Sturmführer." "Yes, Herr Standartenführer," said Schwenke. "I thought I would send 2 men to reconnoiter." "You be one of them, Sturmführer." "Yes, Herr Standartenführer. Here, Kramer, come with me. The rest of you remain where you are until you get orders." "I'll be back," said the Standartenführer, leaving again. Schwenke and Kramer walked west on the Mauerweg. Half a block down, in front of the Café Schudart, they stopped and stood in the entrance of the darkened café. Kramer looked up and down the street. "No police," he said. "Not a sign," said Schwenke. They crossed the street to the synagogue, pushed open the iron fence gate, and went around the building, trying the side and back doors. The furnace room door was unlocked, and they went in. In a few minutes they left again. As they re-entered the private room of the Huntsman's Rest, the men stood up and said, "Hail, Penchman," said Schwenke. "I want you and Heineke and, let me see, Dow, upstairs, quick. You, to the others, remain. This is duty. You hear me?" The 5, including Kramer, went upstairs to the SA meeting room. In a few minutes they came down. "I don't care," Schwenke was saying. "We can use it. We have to have something." "But it's floor oil," said Penchman, "and it belongs to the theater." "I don't care," said Schwenke. "It's oil. This is duty. You heard the Standartenführer, Penchman." "Yes, Herr Sturmführer," said Penchman. Penchman, Heineke, and Dow headed for the theater, a block west of the Huntsman's Rest, and Schwenke and Kramer returned to the furnace room of the synagogue. In a few minutes, the other 3 SA men entered the furnace room, carrying among them 4 3-gallon canisters. There were footsteps above, in the synagogue. "Can I go now?" said Penchman to Schwenke in a whisper. "I'm on duty at 6 a.m. "Go ahead, you..." Shit, I don't know. It's S-T, and I don't even know if it's supposed to be English or German, said Schwenke. "Thank you, Herr Sturmführer," said Penchman. Heineke and Dow left with him without even asking permission. Shit, said Schwenke. Benjamin testified against Schwenke after the war, but he supported Schwenke's claim that there were footsteps heard in the synagogue above when the SA men were in the furnace room. Schwenke had denied having had anything to do with the floor oil taken from the theater. He had, he said, only reconnoitered. The 4 canisters were never found. Schwenke and Kramer returned to the huntsman's arrest around 12:50 midnight. The Sturmfuhrer led the way to a table in the corner of the public room. 10 minutes passed. Nobody spoke in the public room. The men in the private room, beyond the door, were still talking in a murmur. The 2 church bells struck 1 a.m., and the rooster atop the town hall crowed. Then it was quiet again. Schwenke said something to Kramer, and Kramer left the inn. None of the men in the private room raised his head. Kramer returned and said something to Schwenke. Then Schwenke left the inn and returned at once. "SA men," he called. "The synagogue is on fire. Outside, everybody. Close off the street. It's dangerous." A voice said, "Shall we call the fire department?" "I'm in charge," said Schwenke. "Close off the street. It's dangerous. Schnell, hurry." And he turned and went, followed by all the SA men in the inn. The instant the last man was out the door, the innkeeper of the huntsman's arrest entered the public room from the swinging door behind the bar. He closed the outer door to the street, locked it, turned out the lights, and went right to bed. Number 2. Gustav Schwenke, soldier, formerly unemployed tailor's apprentice, age 26. Neuhausen is a little summer resort on the Mersey, an hour by the post bus, 2 hours and 22 cents more expensive by the scenic steamer from the old mining and textile town of Lich in southern Austria. The Pension Goldner Engel, the Golden Angel boarding house, had no guests the night of November 9th, 1938, except for Private Gustav Schwenke of the German military police and his bride of a month. It was their honeymoon. It was, as a matter of fact, their first time together since the 3 terrible days they'd had in Cronenberg when they were married a month before. If Gustav had decided, at the last minute, not to take the scenic steamer from Lich, but to take the post bus and save on the fare, it had to be admitted that he had hired a very nice room at the Goldner Engel. He got the military rate, of course, with the seasonal discount. After bargaining hard with the host, while the bride stood by, even the special 3-day discount, even though the Schwenkes were going to be there only 2 days, the duration of Gustav's pass from his post at Lich. Those 3 terrible days in Cronenberg, after the wedding in October, they had stayed at the groom's home with the groom's father and mother and younger sister and very young brother. The groom's father, S.A. Sturmfuhrer Schwenke, had been against the marriage because the bride's father was not even a party member, and the bride, for all Sturmfuhrer Schwenke knew, she never said anything, might even be a Gegner, an opponent of the regime. Frau Sturmfuhrer Schwenke hated the bride from the first, and said that the girl's family had a history of fits. In those 3 days in Cronenberg after the wedding, the bride had cried all the time, and Gustav hated crying. And Frau Sturmfuhrer Schwenke said, "She can't help it, poor girl, it's hereditary." Sturmfuhrer Schwenke had wanted his oldest son to marry a strong party woman, any strong party woman. The boy was not a party enthusiast, except for his anti-Semitism. He was willing to join the party in 32, glad to, when his father got him the first job he'd ever had in the SA police. But that was for the job. A job, any job, was all he cared about. A good boy, but he didn't have his father's spirit. No wonder. And great wonder that he had any spirit at all. Gustav Schwenke had wet his bed until he was 22 years old. His mother, whose happiest topic of conversation was sickness, she herself had had plenty of it, but her husband had never been sick a day in his life, except for his war wounds, told everybody in Cronenberg about her trouble with Gustav, the problem child. Everybody in Cronenberg knew that Gustav Schwenke was a bedwetter, and Gustav knew that they knew, and he knew how they knew. Long before he was 12, he had hated his mother. One whistle from his father, and he came. 1,000 whistles from his mother, and he hid. When he was 12, his mother was pregnant. She said to him, "What if it's a little brother?" And he said, "If he cries at night, I'll cut his throat." Little Robert, when he came, cried at night, and when he cried, Gustav wet his bed. Little Robert wet his, of course. That's why he cries, his mother told Gustav, because he's ashamed of wetting his bed. Gustav never cried. Gustav had to pull his little brother around after school in the play wagon, and the other kids, besides calling him Bettnasser, called him Kindermädchen, nurse girl. One day, in order to play, Gustav left the wagon with little Robert in it, at the top of a long flight of stone steps leaning down from the marketplace, and somehow the wagon went down the steps. A man stopped it halfway down, and Robert fell out and cried. Robert wasn't hurt, but Gustav got the worst beating of his life. When Gustav was 15 and his father's apprentice, the Schwenke tailor shop failed and the whole family went on the dole. It was then that Gustav discovered that his father was more interested in politics than in work, and would take bread out of his family's mouth in order to make himself a uniform, or take a trip to the Nazi party day in Munich or Weimar or Nuremberg. His father, a spendthrift, and the family hungry. Gustav had always been stingy, a saver of food, scraps of cloth, nails. Now he became a real miser, and a miser he remained, with unfortunately nothing to save, even in his young manhood, but food, scraps of cloth, nails. The room at the Goldner Engel on the Mariasee was nice but expensive. Still, a man wasn't married every day. And when Gustav was away from Kronenberg, he didn't feel so bad about spending something. He didn't feel so bad about anything. Away from Kronenberg, your bride didn't cry, and your mother didn't talk, and your father didn't buy himself uniforms, and you didn't wet your bed, and the wagon didn't go down the steps, and you would never go back to Kronenberg, and you didn't care what they were doing there or anywhere else tonight. It was after 1 o'clock in the morning when Private Gustav Schwenke fell asleep by the side of his bride in the pension Goldner Engel, 300 miles from the burning synagogue in Kronenberg. Number 3. Karl Klingenhofer, cabinet maker, and adjutant to the chief of the Kronenberg Volunteer Fire Department, age 36. The telephone rang by the side of the Klingelhofer's bed in their house on the Altstrasse in Kronenberg. The telephone by the bed, not the fire alarm on the wall. It was the cabinet maker's sister calling, Frau Schudart, whose husband, Fritz, had the Café Schudart on the Mauerweg. Her voice was a frightened whisper. "Karl, the synagogue is burning. Inside. Bad." It was 1:25 a.m. Klingelhofer got into his clothes, his boots, and his fire coat, and onto his bicycle. He could have phoned the night alarm man, or, en route to the Mauerweg, have pulled the alarm in front of the Catherine Church, but he didn't. He had to pedal slowly down the cobbled Altstrasse, but then, on the paved Hermann-Göringstrasse and the Wernerrug to the Frankfurter Platz, he went at racing speed. A man who, besides flute playing and picture painting, had always done physical work, an old hiking club man, who at 36 had the wind of a boy. There were no policemen at the scene. The Mauerweg was closed off by SA men. But German firemen at the scene of a fire automatically have the status of uniformed policemen, and Klingelhofer went through the SA cordon and the gate of the synagogue lawn. Smoke had begun to pour through broken windows, heavy black smoke. "Oil," said the fireman before he smelled it. On the side, away from the smoke, he shone his flashlight into the building. What caught his professional eye was the fact that the fire was burning in several separated spots. Arson. The Sturmfuhrer Schwenke ignored him as he ran across the street to his brother-in-law's cafe, and banged on the door. And when Fritz Schuhart sleepily, or apparently so, opened the door, Klingelhofer ran in, and phoned the alarm man. "Got it already," said the alarm man. "Your buzzer at home rang at 1:38. Klingelhofer, hearing the fire bells in the street, broke off. As the first company pulled up, there was an immense whoosh. The rose windows in the synagogue dome had been broken by the updraft, and the sparks flew up in the sky. The top of the wooden dome was almost as high as the wood-shingled roofs of timbered old houses on Adolf Hitler Strasse, formerly Hochstrasse, a street built up on the ruins of the old town wall in back of the synagogue. If the houses up there caught, the town would go. Adjutant Klingelhofer advised the fire chief to send 2 of the 3 Kronenberg companies up to Hitlerstrasse. In his excitement, he called it Hochstrasse, and called the companies from the villages of Kammerfeld and Rickling, 8 and 11 miles away, to replace them at the synagogue. The chief agreed, and Klingelhofer got a searchlight and broke in the front doors of the burning building. The benches and prayer stands had all been piled on, and around the wooden stage at the center of the prayer hall, where, at the base of an updraft, the fire was fiercest. The dome was supported by 4 wooden pillars, issuing from the corners of the stage. The pediments of the 4 pillars could not be seen in the flame. Up above, they were blackened. A little groggy, the fireman went around the edge of the floor into a smaller room, the vestry perhaps. There was a chest. He broke it open and scooped up its contents, some sort of altar cloths and a set of embroidered hangings. He went out through the prayer hall. In front of the gate to the lawn stood a policeman now, 1 policeman, and Klingelhofer turned the stuff over to him. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. There was no killing the updraft. The dome itself was glowing now. A section of it fell with a roar. A column of fire shot up in the air. It would be dangerous to enter the prayer hall now on account of the pillars. Klingelhofer went back in carefully. Now that the dome was partly gone, the draft was stronger above, and the lower sections of the 2 front pillars could be seen. One was burned, about 4 feet up, to a diameter of about 2.5 inches or so. The other, though burned at the same height, looked as if it would hold. But the 2 back pillars could not be seen. The smoke was being carried off faster now, and with his searchlight, Klingelhofer saw, on the east wall of the prayer hall, a set of gold-embroidered hangings, like those he had got from the chest. They were charred, but he saw that something was built into the wall behind them. When I asked him, many years later, if he knew what it was, he said no. And when I told him that it was the Ark of the Covenant, he said, "The Ark of the Covenant, well, well." He himself was a vestryman of the parish church. Number 4. Heinrich Damm, party headquarters office manager, formerly unemployed salesman, age 28. Heinrich Damm was a country boy, though he'd been in the town 10 years now. He was at home from the party anniversary celebration at 9:15, and at 9:30 he was in bed and asleep at his apartment in the attic of Kreiseltung party headquarters for the Kronenberg. But he slept light that night. There had been talk around town, and from the SA headquarters in the basement of Kreiseltung had come rumors of out-of-town visitors and unusual activity. He heard a noise downstairs and went down. It was Kreisleiter, the county leader. "What brings you here, boss?" said Damm. Like all country people, he had a hard time with new titles, like Herr Kreisleiter, but nobody cared in Damm's case. He could deal with country people like nobody else in the organization. "Some work to finish up," said Kreisleiter without looking up. Damm went back to bed. It was 3 o'clock in the morning when a crash somewhere awakened him. There was a glow in the direction of the Hitlerstrasse and sparks shooting up. In 10 minutes, and without awakening his hard-sleeping country girl wife, he reached the synagogue. SA men and firemen were all over the place. 1 policeman stood in front of the gate to the lawn. A few spectators, remarkably few for such a big fire, stood outside the SA cordon. Dan muttered, "Blodson, idiocy," and went back home. He woke up his wife and told her. "What do you think, Heinrich?" she said. She always asked Heinrich what he thought about things. "Blodson," he said, "would they have stopped us by burning our headquarters?" He was undressing when his phone rang. It was the Kreisleiter at home. "Can you bring your car, Heinrich? We've got to go out in the country." The Kreisleiter, whose father had been a professor, always took Heinrich Damm with him when he had to go out in the country. On the way to Spell, the next big town, they said nothing. As they entered Spell, the Kreisleiter said, "What do you think, Heinrich? What do you think, boss?" "It's as if they had tried to stop us in the old days by burning the Kreisleitung," said Kreisleiter. "By golly, boss, you're right," said Damm. "I hadn't thought of it that way. It's Blodson." "We have to cover the country," said Kreisleiter as they pulled up in front of the Kreisleitung in Spell. The Gauerleiter's adjutant called. "Order from the Reichsmarshal Göring. It's everywhere. All over Germany. It must be stopped at once. Whoever lays a hand on Volksgut must be punished." Damm glanced at Kreisleiter when he said Volksgut, the German people's property, and said nothing. It was almost dawn when they got back to Cronenberg. "Where to, boss?" said Damm. "Home," said Kreisleiter. As he got back into bed, Damm's wife said to him, "What do you think, Heinrich?" "Blodson," said Damm, one of the March of Violets who flocked into the party in 1933. "It's as if they had tried to stop us in the old days by burning the Kreisleitung." Number 5. Horstmar Ruprecht, high school student, age 14. The crash of the synagogue dome that awakened Heinrich Damm awakened the Ruprechts on Klingasse 3 blocks from the fire. They saw the sparks from the second-floor window of the house and went up through the hatch to the roof. There they could see the glowing half-dome. Horst's mother held his hand. He hated having his hand held. "Papa," said his mother to his father, "it's the synagogue." The father said nothing. "Of course it's the synagogue," Horst said, excited. "May the Jews drop dead." "Come down," said his father. "Golly, not yet, Pa." His father opened the hatch. "Can I go to the fire, Pa? They'll all be there, can I?" The family, Horst was an only child, and the only member of either his father's or his mother's family who had ever gone to high school instead of to trade school, went down the hatchway to the attic. It was pitch dark, and Horst, his mother still holding onto his hand, heard his father stop instead of opening the door to the stairs. "They'll all be there, Pa, can I?" "They won't all be there, Horstmar. You won't be there." That was a long speech for Emil Ruprecht. A long speech, and it meant that a longer speech would follow. Horst's hand stopped wriggling in his mother's. "Where did you even learn to say, Judah Verke, made the Jews drop dead?" said his father. "In the Hajot, the Hitler Youth," said Horst. "So," said his father, "in the Hajot. They don't teach it, Pa, you just hear it there. The other kids say it. They all say it." "Like they'll all be there," said his father. "You just hear it, Pa, don't you understand?" "No." Father, mother, and son stood there. At 14, Horst couldn't stand what, when he was grown, he called his father's Schweigenskeit, his taciturnity, any more than he could stand what he later called his mother's unresisting obedience to her husband. Horst was one of those 14-year-olds who can't stand things, and he was in the Hajot. "Horstmar," said his father. He never called him Horst, and Horst couldn't stand that either. "Do you know what a synagogue is?" "Of course," said Horst. His father was silent. "Tell Papa what it is, son." said Frau Ruprecht, who was afraid of both her husband and her son. It's the Jews' church, said Horst. And a church? Said his father. What is a church, Horstmar? A house of God, pa golly. A house of God, without the pa golly, said his father. Yes, pa, a house of God. God's house, said his father. Yes, pa. And you, Horstmar, you want to go and see them burn God's house down? No, pa, golly, you don't understand. Are you for the Jews, pa? Father, mother, and son stood there. No, son, of course not, of course he's not, said Frau Ruprecht, who was afraid of her husband, her son, of God, and of Hitler. Emil Ruprecht opened the attic door, and the family went down and back to bed. But Horst was disturbed and excited. In a way he felt sorry for his father. In a way he had not felt before. A locomotive engineer all his life, at $144 a month. A little man with a little job and a little wife and a little house. A man who said nothing, because the fact was he had nothing to say. A man who knew nothing of politics and the world and who claimed to be a Nazi. Horst had been 8 when his father joined the party in the fall of '32. Now he knew that his father was just a me-tooer. You want to go and see them burn God's house down? Men setting fire to houses at night. God's house. Horst's house. His father's house. Horst rolled around in his sleep and awakened, afraid. Whenever Horst was afraid at night, he looked into his parents' room to see if they were there. Now he crept to the door and opened it. The light had begun. His mother was in bed, but his father was sitting in the rocking chair at the window. It was 5:15 in the morning. Number 6. Heinrich Wedekind, baker, age 51. At 5:15, the Brotchen, the little breakfast rolls, had to be in the oven to be out with the boy before 6. Baker Wedekind, behind his shop at the far west end of Hitlerstrasse, was at work in his slippers and trousers and apron, which needed changing. His suspenders over his quarter-sleeve heavy gray underwear. He got the Brotchen in and stepped to the front of the shop to open the door, have a look at breaking light, and smoke his cigar. He had been thinking of going down to his garden plot at the edge of town and turning it before it got any colder, but the dawn looked like rain. He'd go tomorrow. As he stood there, 2 men whom he knew came by from the direction of Frankfurter Platz. "What's up at this hour?" he said. They told him that the synagogue had burned down in the night. "So," he said, and went back to his Brotchen, the synagogue. In 1933, Baker Wedekind had been party manager for his block, and as he put it, a Flotter SA man, a jaunty stormtrooper. One day he'd been sitting in the Felsenkeller having a beer when somebody threw a rock through the window of the Jew Mannheimer's shoe store. Wedekind rushed into the store and scooped up the money from the cash register, just to protect it, and the police came. The next day, the plainclothesman old Hofmeister called him in and said that some of the money was missing. That was taken care of by the party, but there was a rumor around town that Bauermert, the Social Democrat Bolshevik, had taken a snapshot of the baker standing in front of the cash register with his hands full of money. It was just a rumor, of course, but Wedekind quit the SA as soon as he had a good excuse. When the Handicrafts and Trade office of the party in Cronenberg was opened, and he was offered the thankless job of mediator. As he took his rolls from the fire, Baker Wedekind thought that he would like to see the Jew church burned down, but on second thought it might be better to go by the garden and work. No use looking for trouble. The shoe shop affair was enough. He would go by tomorrow, Just walk past on his way to Frankfurter Platz and have a good look. That was the way to do it. So he finished his rolls and went upstairs to eat breakfast with his wife, who was just as thick and strong as he was and did social work for the party. He never talked to his wife or to his son, whose wife resented her husband's low pay at the bakery, or to his daughter, who had gotten into trouble and could not be got rid of. The fact is that Baker Wedekind was not a jaunty man at all. He was a baker, and he baked. Each month, he looked through that month's master baker. Each day, he read the headlines of the Daily Kronenberger. He had a copy of Mein Kampf, who hadn't, but he hadn't opened it, who had. If he had been a profoundly reflective man, Baker Wedekind might have said to himself as he ate his breakfast, "This life is work. The next, if only a man knew for sure, would be different. In bad times in this life, you work without reward. In good times, you work with reward. But in bad times and good, you work. These are good times. The regime promised the people bread, and I bake the bread. The 1,000-year Reich, if it lasts 1,000 years, fine. 100 years, fine. 10 years, still fine." It was 6:15 a.m. Beginning to rain. Baker Wedekind went down to the garden anyway. Number 7. Hans Simon, bill collector, age 42. Hans Simon got up at 6:15, as he always did, shaved, waxed his little mustache, and had his breakfast, in the course of which he reviewed the world situation, as he always did, with his wife, his son, and his daughter as audience, and set out, banging the door behind him, for the municipal electric works to pick up his morning calls. He bicycled firmly along, never swerving, preoccupied with the world situation. He had a right to be. Cell leader Simon. Cell leader was the very lowest rank in the party, was one of the first Nazis in Germany and the first in Kronenberg. Sturmfuhrer Schwenke, the bankrupt tailor, always claimed to be the first. He always talked about "we old party fighters," but he never gave his party number, and no one had ever seen his gold party badge. Simon wore his badge on his jacket, where everyone saw it, and whenever it was the 13th of the month, he walked under ladders and so on, and said, "13 is nothing unlucky for me. My party number is 5,813, the 5,813th German to join the party, and I call that lucky." And before that, a member of the Führer Freiheitsbewegung, the freedom movement, and before the bloody parade in Munich. These reflections having taken Hans Simon across the Wern Bridge and into Frankfurter Platz, he saw a fire truck half a block down on the Mauerweg and a small crowd held back by SA men. It was drizzling, but the bill collector decided to pedal to the scene. It might be something of great importance. The building was gone. The outer walls and part of the wooden dome, still smoking, were left. There was one policeman present, in front of the gate of the iron fence around the lawn. A skinny old woman was talking in a cackle to whoever would listen. "A church, a church, a church," she kept saying. SA men answered her. No one else said anything. "A Jew church," said one SA man. "It's not even a church," said another. "Why don't you join, Auntie? Be a Jew girl." "A church, a church, a church," the old woman kept saying. Bill collector Simon, party number 5,813, gold party badge, rode on in the rain to pick up his morning calls and pondered the world situation. It was 7:30 in the morning. Number 8. Johann Kessler, Labor Front Inspector, formerly unemployed bank clerk, age 46. At 7:30, Inspector Kessler got off the local train from Kummerfeld and walked to his office in the Labor Front, in Hermann Göringstrasse. He got there at 20 to 8. He wasn't due until 8. And Picht came in and said, "Have you heard? They burned the synagogue last night. Here, everywhere." He and Picht picked up Euler on their way out, and the three men walked down to Werneweg, to Frankfurter Platz and the Mauerweg in the drizzle. There it was, still smoking. None of them said anything until they reached the Rinnerweg on their way back to the office. Then Kessler, a renegade Catholic who preached in the Nazi faith movement, said, "This is a change. A big change." "Burning property," said Pict, shaking his head. "Burning property, whether it's a church or whatever. It won't make them love us abroad," said Euler. "Do they love us now?" said Pict. Euler didn't reply. "A big change," said Kessler again. "Ein Evolution." Kessler liked to use flowery language. Ahead of them, Pastor Treschow of the Catherine Church was walking slowly away from the scene of the fire, an old man who had always kept out of politics. "The pastor took a squint at it, too," said Euler. Just then there was a shout behind them. "The Catherine Church next." Pict and Euler raised their eyes to each other, but Kessler, the renegade Catholic, stopped sharply and looked back. People were hurrying to work on both sides of the street, some of them under umbrellas. Nobody but Kessler had stopped or raised his eyes. Pastor Treschow was walking slowly on. Number 9. Heinrich Hildebrandt, high school teacher, age 34. Herr Studienrat, Studienrat. Hildebrandt waited until Pfefferman caught up with him. Pfefferman was a student at the university now, but he had been one of Hildebrandt's students in the classical high school. Pfefferman liked and admired Hildebrandt. Even though Hildebrandt was a Nazi, and an ostentatious one, he was a highly cultivated man who really knew literature and music, a true continental. It was even said, no one knew, that before coming to Kronenberg, he had once been an anti-Nazi, and owed his survival to the personal influence of his father, an old army colonel. How anxious Hildebrandt was to talk with Pfefferman, who was a Mischling. His father was a Jew in the marriage, which made it worse. Was another question, although the teacher certainly had liked the student. "Have you heard, Herr Studienrat? The synagogue has burned." "The synagogue?" "Yes." "Have you been there?" "No. Have you time to go?" Herr Hildebrandt had time this morning. His literature class were writing their examination, and he always made a point of arriving late on an examination day to show the students that he trusted them. He hesitated a moment, began to blush, and then said, "Yes, I have time." It was 8:45 or so when they got there. The fire had almost burned itself out, but the smoke still came through the half-fallen dome of the building. The fire trucks, one on the Mauerweg, one up above on Hitlerstrasse, were no longer pumping. It was drizzling. "The synagogue," said Pfefferman, shaking his head. Hildebrandt, blushing, said nothing. The American, Henderson, a buoyant young man who was studying, not very hard, at Kronenberg University, and through Pfefferman had met Hildebrandt before, came over to them. He said good morning without shaking hands, American fashion, and asked in German, "Was ist los, Herr Studienrat?" Hildebrandt shook his head without answering. He felt himself blushing, and, feeling himself blushing, blushed worse. As he entered his classroom, the class interrupted its writing to stand until he had said good morning and sat down at his desk. He opened his briefcase and took out Crime and Punishment in French, with a plain wrapping paper cover over the binding, to read while the class continued their examination. Always fire, the Reichstag fire, the book burning in the Paradeplatz in Königsberg. He was an anti-Nazi then, in 1933, a man who read the Basler Nachrichter and Le Temps every day, and even once in a while, with great difficulty for his English was weak, the Times of London. Now he was a Nazi, reading Crime and Punishment in French, with a plain wrapping paper cover over the binding. Now he was a Nazi, and the Nazis were burning synagogues. The noon bell rang. The students brought their examination books to the desk, and each said, "Guten Morgen, Herr Studienrat," but the Studienrat, reading his book in the wrapping paper cover, did not look up. Number 10. Willy Hofmeister, policeman, age 57. It was noon, and plainclothesman Hoffmeister of the Cronenberg Detective Bureau was pedaling over the Verna Bridge on his way to work. Thursday was his morning to paint, but you can't paint in the rain. Hoffmeister had chronic lead poisoning. He was allowed to paint once a week out of doors. His paintings in oil were, like cabinetmaker Klingelhofer's, what a critic would call calendar art, as far as subject, mood, and technique were concerned, but of their kind they were skilled and delicate. Willy Hoffmeister had to give up his profession of scenery painting when he was 28. In 1908, he had become a policeman in Cronenberg, first in the traffic police, then in the criminal division. It had not been a bad life. In 30 years, there had only been 3 killings in Cronenberg, and only one of them a murder. The other 2 were sex maniac cases. In 3 more years, he would retire on full pension. Not bad. But Willy Hoffmeister had always wanted to paint. When his wife, who always made him stay in bed late and rest on Thursdays, told him that there was smoke coming up near Frankfurter Platz, Hoffmeister knew right away what it was. The morning before, Oscar Rosenthal, the former bank director, had come to his office, stood with his hands at his side, and said, as Nazi protocol required, "Ich bin der Jude, Oscar Israel Rosen." "Please, please, Herr Director," Hoffmeister said to the former bank director. "Sit down, won't you?" When Rosenthal, the chairman of the board of the Cronenberg Synagogue, told him that more windows had been broken the night before, and the janitor had reported a smell of gasoline, Hoffmeister said to the old man, "A man will investigate at once, Herr Director, especially the gasoline smell. The windows, well, such things are difficult, you know, with the shooting in Paris yesterday." "I understand, Herr Criminal Inspector," said Rosenthal. "So, Criminal Inspector Hoffmeister, rising, if you will excuse me a moment, I'll get the stenographer, and you can dictate a report of the gasoline smell in the windows, and we shall register with the complaint." "No, no, Herr Criminal Inspector," said Rosenthal. "I would rather not make a report, and there is certainly no complaint." "But," said Hoffmeister, "a report must be made." "No, really," Rosenthal said, rising. "It is not at all necessary from my point of view. I would much prefer not to make a report." "But there must be a report, Herr Director," said Hoffmeister. "Only if you insist, Herr Criminal Inspector," said Rosenthal. The old policeman twisted his mustache, his immense white mustache, and said, "I shall make the report myself, Herr Director. After we have investigated, all possible steps will be taken." He held out his hand to the former bank director and said, "Bitte, Herr Director." The old Jew took his hand and said, "Bitte, Herr Criminal Inspector," and left. Hoffmeister had sent a policeman to the synagogue to investigate, and before he himself left for home at the end of the day, he wrote the report and placed it in the Cronenberg police files, which were found incompletely burned in the alley behind the police station when the American troops entered Cronenberg 7 years later. The report, dated November 9th, 1938, read, "Synagogue, Mauereg, report of broken windows, etc. Investigation at the scene established the fact that on the night of November 8th, 7 window panes in the synagogue of the Mauereg were broken by stones thrown by unknown persons. Some of the stones lay in the prayer hall, some on the lawn. On the southeast gable side of the building, just outside the window leading to the furnace room, which window was also found to have been broken, were the remnants of 2 wine bottles. These bottles had obviously been filled with a liquid, the odor of which was still present on the glass particles and in the immediate vicinity, corked with paper and rag bits, and ignited. Indications point to an explosion of small extent, i.e. of limited effect. Damage to the building, apart from a blackening on the wall, was not present. Criminologically valuable clues were not present. Search for perpetrators without result, as of 5:20 p.m. instant date. On the side of those whose interests were injured, there was no demand for investigation. That was the afternoon before, and now, as he pedaled over Vernbridge, Policeman Hoffmeister was worried. The report had gone down to the chiefs of both the traffic and criminal police before 6 p.m., and Hoffmeister was sure that there must have been ununiformed police guarding the building during the night. The SA, of course it was the SA, did not like the police, and the police despised the SA. So there must have been trouble. Hofmeister decided to go over to the synagogue. There were SA men everywhere, and only one uniformed policeman, Baumann, the traffic division, in front of the synagogue gate. Hofmeister talked to him. Baumann answered. Hofmeister asked him something, and Baumann shrugged his shoulders as he replied. Then Hofmeister walked away. Hail Hitler, Herr Criminal Inspector. It was Schwenke, the Sturmfuhrer. Morgen, said Hofmeister, getting on his bicycle. Schwenke, the Sturmfuhrer. It was in 1931. Hofmeister had been sent to search Schwenke's apartment for evidence of illegal possession of arms by the SA, and Schwenke had said, "You find nothing in my mail, Herr Criminal Inspector. Do you think you'll find something in my apartment?" Schwenke, the Nazi. Now it was Hofmeister, the Nazi. Schwenke and Hofmeister. The old policeman had 3 years to go, and then his pension, and the doctor said that if he wasn't working, he could paint. At the office, Hofmeister was told to report to the police chief, the Oberinspector. Herr Criminal Inspector, said the police chief, a young man, I have an order to be executed. I will read it to you, and then I will ask you to read it yourself and sign it. And sign it, Herr Oberinspector, said Hofmeister. And sign it, Herr Criminal Inspector. The order said that all male Jews in Cronenberg between the ages of 18 and 65 were to be taken into protective custody at once. The order was to be executed before midnight of the instant date, November 10th, 1938, by the criminal police, who in Germany could always arrest without a warrant. Criminal Inspector Hofmeister was to deliver the following persons, whose names began with F through M, to the storerooms of the town hall, which would be used for custody because of the shortage of custodial quarters. Clear, Herr Criminal Inspector? Yes, Herr Oberinspector. You will remain on duty until all the persons on your list are in custody, then you will get your overtime off. Yes, Herr Oberinspector. Policeman Hofmeister took his list and began his round without his bicycle. He carried no weapon. It was a long afternoon. It might have been longer, except that every man on the list was at home. No Jew in Cronenberg had gone out of his house since the night before. Still, it was a long afternoon, and when Policeman Hofmeister rang the apartment bell alongside Sallow Marowitz's tailor shop, it was going on 9 o'clock. Marowitz opened the door and said, "Come in, Herr Criminal Inspector." "Thank you, Herr Marowitz." On the parlor table, under the green glass tulip chandelier, was a suitcase, closed. On the sofa were a man's coat and hat. "Herr Marowitz, won't you sit down, Herr Criminal Inspector? Thank you, a moment only, Herr Marowitz. You have come for me, Herr Criminal Inspector." "Yes, Herr Marowitz, just for your own I understand, Herr Criminal Inspector. Shall we go?" "Yes, if you don't mind, Herr Marowitz, may I ask if you have blankets and food and a little money?" "Money, yes, but not blankets, and my wife will bring me food if it's necessary." "Why don't you take a blanket, just to have one, and maybe some bread and sausage or something, Herr Marowitz? You understand, I don't—" "Thank you, Herr Criminal Inspector. Mama, come and say good evening to Criminal Inspector Hofmeister." "No," from the other room. "I'm sorry, Herr Criminal Inspector. Frau Marowitz isn't so well this evening. I'll get the blanket and food." Hofmeister sat in the room alone, and the apartment door was unlocked from the outside. Samuel, the tailor's 17-year-old Mischling son, came in. "Hello, Herr Criminal Inspector. I saw George this afternoon at the synagogue. They blew it up as a safety measure." "I know," said Hofmeister. George was his youngest son. "You don't see something like that every day," said Samuel. "No, you don't, Samuel," said Hofmeister. "And George says he's sure I can get in the Air Corps. They take half-Jews. He's going to speak to— Hello, Pop, what's the blanket for? Where are you going?" "Hello, Shmuel. I'm going to spend the night out." "Where?" "At the town hall. Herr Hofmeister is going with me." "Oh," the boy paused. "Can I go along?" "Well—" "Oh, yes," said Hofmeister. "Part way. We'll all walk together." Well, said Marowitz, a glass of wine, Herr Criminal Inspector? No, thank you, Herr Marowitz. Not on duty, you know. Maybe just a... No, thank you. Anyway, I appreciate it. The son, carrying the father's suitcase and walking between the two older men. The three of them climbed up through the streets, around the turns, up the steps, to the marketplace which led to the town hall. We're traveling at a snail's pace, said the son. Herr Hofmeister and I are older than you, son, aren't we, Herr Criminal Inspector? Yes, Herr Marowitz, said Hofmeister, yes, we are. Then he stopped and said, I'm a little out of breath, if you don't mind, Herr Marowitz. I'm tired tonight. If you and Samuel care to walk on ahead, I'll catch up with you.